Welcome to our insightful and impressive story today. Millionaire's ex-girlfriend was sold for a relationship. Years later, no one can believe it. In this riveting video, we explore a story that defies belief and unfolds like a thrilling novel. A millionaire's ex-girlfriend, once sold for a relationship, has a tale that is both shocking and inspiring. Years have passed since the initial events, and the twists and turns of her journey continue to captivate everyone who hears it. Years after her initial ordeal, the ex-girlfriend has transformed her life in ways that no one could have predicted. She has become an inspiration to many, proving that even the most difficult situations can lead to unexpected growth and opportunity. Her journey is filled with surprising revelations that challenge societal norms and perceptions. Inform us if you are enthusiastic about this narrative. If you are, press 1 if you found the video to be enjoyable. If this is not the case, press 0. Your comments are a great source of motivation for me to collect more stories that are uplifting and meaningful.
The reflection in the mirror was almost unrecognizable. Emily observed with a mixture of fascination and horror the transformation she had undergone in the last few hours. The wedding dress, with its delicate embroidery and tiny pearls, seemed to suffocate her with each breath. The maids moved around her like agitated butterflies, adjusting every detail with military precision, while the housekeeper, Mrs. Grayson, supervised everything with her eagle eyes. "Straighten your back, Miss Emily," Mrs. Grayson ordered for the 10th time that morning. "A future general's wife cannot carry herself like a peasant." Emily suppressed a sigh of frustration. Just 3 months ago, she was in her family's fields, free to run among the wheat crops, feeling the sun on her face and the wind in her hair. Now she was about to become the wife of General Victor Aldridge, a man she barely knew, all because of a political agreement between her father and the local government. The stone castle, with its cold walls and endless corridors, was a completely different world from everything she had known. Each step echoed through the halls like a reminder of her new golden cage. The tall windows let in sunlight, but the thick glass filtered out the heat, making the environment even more artificial and distant. "The general will be pleased," murmured one of the maids, adjusting the lace veil over Emily's dark curls. "You look truly dazzling, miss." Emily forced a smile, but her green eyes reflected the storm forming inside her. General Victor was without doubt an impressive man. Tall, with impeccable military bearing and piercing blue eyes, he commanded respect wherever he went. In the few supervised encounters they had, he had always been cordial and polite. But there was something in his gaze, a calculated coldness that made her shudder. "It's time for the final rehearsal," announced Mrs. Grayson, consulting her pocket watch. "The wedding is tomorrow and everything needs to be absolutely perfect." Emily followed the housekeeper through the castle corridors, the heavy dress dragging along the red carpet. Each step took her further away from her youthful dreams, from the afternoons spent reading novels hidden in the barn, from the moments of freedom riding through the fields. As she passed one of the windows, her gaze was drawn to the stables. Among the well-groomed horses, one in particular caught her attention, a majestic and wild black stallion, newly arrived at the castle. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Emily felt an immediate connection with that untamed spirit. The rehearsal proceeded like a well-rehearsed play. Emily repeated the mechanical movements, the empty words, while her mind wandered to distant places. The priest, an elderly man with a monotonous voice, recited the sacred words with the same emotion as someone reading a shopping list. By nightfall, when she was finally released to her chambers, Emily felt exhausted. Not just physically, but her soul seemed to have been squeezed and molded to fit into a space too small. The maids helped her out of the wedding dress, and she could finally breathe. Alone in her room, she walked to the window. The crescent moon illuminated the castle gardens, and in the distance she could see the city lights. Somewhere beyond those lights was her old life, her freedom. The black stallion was still visible in the stable, its majestic silhouette cut against the night. It was then that an idea began to form in her mind, a dangerous, unthinkable idea for a lady of her position. But the more she thought about it, the more irresistible it became. The black horse seemed to be calling her, promising one last chance to taste freedom before the chains of marriage bound her forever. Emily closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She knew that what she was planning was madness, but her heart beat faster just thinking about it. Tomorrow would be her wedding day, but tonight was still hers. And she intended to enjoy it in the only way she knew how, by being truly herself, one last time. With trembling fingers, she began to change from her nightgown into clothes more appropriate for a night ride. The castle slept, but Emily was more awake than ever, ready for her small rebellion against the fate that others had chosen for her. Emily slipped through the castle corridors like a shadow, her silent steps muffled by the thick carpets. Her heart was beating so loudly that she feared the guards might hear it. Dressed in riding breeches she had found at the bottom of her trunk and a simple shirt, she felt more like herself than she had in months. The path to the stables seemed endless. Every creaking door, every whisper of wind made her freeze, expecting to be discovered. But years of experience in nighttime escapades at her old home had taught her the art of silence. Finally, she reached her goal. The familiar aroma of hay and horses greeted her like an old friend. The black stallion was awake, as if waiting for her. His intelligent eyes shone in the darkness, reflecting the moonlight that entered through the cracks in the roof. Emily approached slowly, extending her hand in a gesture of peace. "Hello, beautiful," she whispered, admiring his glossy coat. "How about a little adventure tonight?" The horse responded with a soft neigh, lowering his head to sniff her hand. Emily smiled, feeling an instant connection with the animal. "I'll call you Thunder," she decided, stroking his muscular neck, "because you seem as free and powerful as a storm." With precise and experienced movements, Emily prepared Thunder for the ride. Each buckle adjusted, each knot tied was a small victory against time. The horse remained surprisingly calm, as if understanding the need for discretion. Guiding Thunder out of the stable, Emily took a deep breath of the night air. The moon illuminated the fields beyond the castle walls, an irresistible invitation to freedom. With a fluid motion, she mounted the horse and, after a moment of hesitation, directed him to a side path she had learned during her supervised walks. The wind began to play with her hair as soon as they passed the castle's secondary gates. Emily had carefully studied the guards' routines over the past few weeks, and she knew exactly when the shift change created a gap in surveillance. Thunder moved like a shadow, his hooves barely making a sound on the grassy ground. When they finally reached the main road, Emily loosened the reins a little more. Thunder responded immediately, increasing his pace. The world began to pass in a blur of shadows and moonlight, and for the first time in months, Emily felt truly alive. The fields stretched endlessly before her, undulating gently in the night breeze. The scent of wildflowers mixed with the fresh air, bringing memories of her free childhood. Emily allowed Thunder to choose his own path, trusting the animal's instinct. It was then that something unexpected happened. As they passed a small grove, Emily spotted a solitary figure by the roadside. The moonlight revealed a tall man, mounted on a horse as majestic as Thunder. Her heart skipped a beat when their gazes met. "A lady shouldn't ride alone at this hour," said the stranger, his deep voice carrying a tone of amusement that contradicted the severity of his words. Emily straightened in the saddle, raising her chin in defiance. "And a gentleman shouldn't make hasty judgments about a stranger," she replied, surprising herself with her own boldness. The man laughed, a rich and genuine sound that echoed through the night. "Touché, my lady," he responded, slightly inclining his head. The moonlight revealed strong features and intense eyes that seemed to see through her soul. "But I confess that my curiosity has been piqued. It's not common to find someone with such determination at this hour." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine, not of fear, but of something different, something she couldn't name. The stranger had a magnetic presence, an air of mystery that intrigued and alerted her at the same time. "Perhaps I'm looking for answers," she said, carefully choosing her words. "Or perhaps you're running from questions," he replied, his penetrating gaze studying every detail of her face. A silence charged with tension settled between them. Emily could feel Thunder restless beneath her, responding to her own inner agitation. The stranger remained motionless, an equestrian statue bathed in moonlight. "The best answers usually come when we stop running," he said finally, his voice softer now. "But sometimes we need the escape to find the courage to face the truth." His words hit Emily like lightning, reverberating inside her with an uncomfortable truth. Before she could respond, a distant wolf howl broke the spell of the moment. Thunder stirred, reminding Emily of the passing time. "I need to go," she said, gathering the reins. "We will meet again," stated the stranger with a certainty that disturbed her. It wasn't a question, but a declaration. Emily turned thunder towards the castle, her heart beating in an irregular rhythm. When she looked back one last time, the stranger had disappeared as if he had never existed, leaving only his enigmatic words echoing in her mind. The sun had barely risen when Emily returned to her chambers, her heart still racing from the night adventure. Through the window, the first golden rays began to tinge the sky, announcing her wedding day. The words of the mysterious stranger still echoed in her mind, disturbing her thoughts like waves in a calm lake. She barely had time to change clothes when Mrs. Grayson burst into the room, followed by a battalion of maids. Her perceptive eyes scanned the environment, pausing for a moment on the muddy boots poorly hidden under the bed. "Miss Emily, you're pale," observed the housekeeper, her tone carrying a note of suspicion. "I hope you slept well. Today is a very important day." "Yes, Mrs. Grayson," Emily replied, keeping her voice steady despite her fatigue. "Just a bit nervous about the preparations." The next hours passed in a whirlwind of activities. Emily was bathed in waters perfumed with rose essences, her nails were polished until they shone like pearls, and her hair was meticulously arranged in an elaborate hairstyle. Every detail was supervised with military precision by Mrs. Grayson. "General Victor is a man of refined tastes," commented one of the maids, while adjusting the corset of the wedding dress. "You're very lucky to have been chosen, miss." "Lucky?" Emily suppressed a bitter smile. What kind of luck was it that imprisoned her in a golden cage? Her thoughts flew to the encounter of the previous night, to those mysterious eyes that seemed to see into her soul. "Miss Emily," Mrs. Grayson's stern voice brought her back to reality. "You're daydreaming again. A lady must always maintain her composure." The wedding dress, even more elaborate than the one used in the rehearsal, weighed like armor. The layers of silk and lace suffocated her movements, turning each step into an exercise in balance. The reflection in the mirror showed a fairy tale princess, but Emily felt more like a puppet in a luxury theater. A soft knock on the door announced her father's arrival. Anthony Miller, a man of humble origins who had gained respect through his work on the lands, entered the room with misty eyes. "My daughter," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You look beautiful." Emily felt her heart tighten. She knew her father believed he was doing the best for her, ensuring a prosperous future through this alliance. How could she explain that wealth and status were not substitutes for freedom? "Father," she began, but was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway. General Victor had arrived at the castle earlier than expected. His powerful presence was announced even before his entry into the room, when his authoritative voice echoed through the corridors, giving orders to the servants. "It's not good luck for the groom to see the bride before the ceremony," exclaimed Mrs. Grayson, agitated. But it was too late. The door opened, and General Victor entered, imposing in his full-dress uniform covered with medals. His blue eyes scanned the room until they fixed on Emily, and a satisfied smile appeared on his lips. "My future wife," he said, his deep voice filling the room. "I see they have spared no effort to make you worthy of your new position." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something predatory in that gaze, something that made her want to run far away. But then she remembered the words of the stranger from the night before. "The best answers usually come when we stop running." "General," she responded, making a perfect curtsy, exactly as Mrs. Grayson had taught. "It's a surprise to see you so early. I came to personally ensure that everything is according to my specifications," he explained, approaching. "After all, this wedding represents more than a simple union. It's the consolidation of an important alliance." His fingers lightly touched Emily's chin, forcing her to look into his eyes. "And you, my dear, are the most precious jewel of this alliance." The touch, although gentle, made Emily feel marked, as if a branding iron had touched her skin. At that moment, more than ever, she wished she was mounted on thunder, galloping freely through the fields under the moonlight. "The ceremony will begin in 2 hours," announced the general, addressing everyone in the room. "I expect everything to proceed with the perfection I have planned." When he left, Emily allowed herself to breathe again. The room returned to its previous agitation, but something had changed. A silent determination began to grow in her chest, fueled by the memory of the nocturnal encounter and the enigmatic words of the stranger. If she couldn't escape her destiny, perhaps she could face it on her own terms. The castle chapel gleamed with the light of hundreds of candles. The stained glass windows filtered the sunlight, creating a mosaic of colors that danced over the elegantly dressed guests. The air was heavy with the perfume of white lilies that decorated every bench, every column, every available space. Emily waited in the small vestibule, her father by her side, both in silence. The bouquet of white roses trembled slightly in her gloved hands. Through the half-open door, she could hear the murmurs of the local aristocracy, all eager to witness the union that would seal important political alliances. "There's still time," her father whispered, surprising her. Anthony Miller had never been a man of many words, but when he spoke, his words carried the weight of wisdom acquired through years of hard work. "Time for what, Dad?" asked Emily, her heart accelerating with the implicit possibility in those words. "To be happy," he replied, his eyes meeting hers with unexpected intensity. "I always imagined your wedding would be for love, as mine was with your mother." Emily felt tears forming in her eyes, but she held them back. The thought of her mother, who had passed away when she was still a child, brought a wave of conflicting emotions. "You wouldn't approve of a withdrawal now," she said, more as a statement than a question. "I would approve of your happiness," he replied simply, "but I also understand the weight of responsibilities." Before Emily could respond, the first chords of the organ announced the beginning of the ceremony. The large oak doors opened, revealing the central aisle of the chapel filled with expectant faces. At the altar, General Victor waited, imposing in his full dress uniform. His military bearing and severe expression contrasted with the romantic atmosphere that the decorators had worked so hard to create. By his side, a man Emily didn't recognize observed him with an enigmatic expression. Each step towards the altar seemed heavier than the previous one. Emily focused on her breathing, remembering the words of the stranger from the night before. "Sometimes we need the escape to find the courage to face the truth." What was the truth she needed to face? Upon reaching the altar, her father kissed her forehead and handed her over to the general. The cold touch of his glove sent a shiver down her spine. The priest began the ceremony, his monotonous voice echoing through the chapel. It was then that something unexpected happened. As she raised her eyes, Emily met the gaze of the man next to the general. With a shock of recognition, she realized it was the same stranger she had encountered during her night ride. His eyes, even more intense in the daylight, conveyed a silent message that she couldn't decipher. The general must have noticed her distraction, for he squeezed her hand more tightly, bringing her attention back to the ceremony. "The vows," he murmured, his low voice carrying a note of warning. Emily began to recite the rehearsed words, but each promise seemed to weigh on her tongue like lead. She promised obedience, respect, devotion. Empty words that echoed through the chapel like ghosts of her true desires. The mysterious man continued to observe her, his penetrating gaze awakening memories of the freedom she had felt, galloping under the moonlight. Who was he? Why was he there? And why did his presence disturb her so much? The exchange of rings happened as if in a dream. The heavy gold ring on her finger felt more like a shackle than a symbol of union. The general smiled, satisfied, but his eyes remained as cold as ice. When the priest declared them husband and wife, Emily felt as if an invisible door had closed behind her. The general's kiss was brief and formal, more a demonstration for the audience than a gesture of affection. During the reception that followed, Emily observed the mysterious man conversing with various important guests. His presence caused a subtle stir, as if everyone knew him, but no one dared to speak much about him. "My cousin Mark," the general explained later, when he noticed her interest. "A brilliant man, but with ideas a bit too progressive for my taste. Keep your distance from him." The name didn't match the man she had met the night before, and Emily was sure there was more to that story than the general was willing to reveal. Each new detail only increased the mystery surrounding that stranger. The party extended into the afternoon, transforming into an elaborate banquet by nightfall. Emily smiled, danced and acted exactly as a bride should, but her mind was far away, riding freely through the fields with thunder, under a starry sky. In a moment of apparent distraction, Mark approached her, offering a glass of wine. "The best stories," he said in a low voice, "are those that begin with an unexpected ending." Before Emily could respond, he had already moved away, leaving her with more questions than answers. What did he mean? What role did he play in this story that seemed increasingly complex? The first week as General Victor's wife passed in a whirlwind of new rules and expectations. Emily discovered that being the lady of the castle meant much more than just wearing elegant dresses and attending formal dinners. Every minute of her day was meticulously planned by Mrs. Grayson, who now responded directly to the general's orders. "A general's wife must be an example of virtue and composure," repeated the housekeeper, while supervising the etiquette, posture, and conversation classes that occupied Emily's mornings. "Your humble origin cannot show through at any moment." The afternoons were dedicated to meetings with important people whom the general considered fundamental to his political plans. Emily found herself forced to smile and agree with conversations she barely understood, always under her husband's watchful eye. It was during one of these events that she had her second encounter with Mark. He appeared unexpectedly at an afternoon tea, causing visible discomfort in the general. "Cousin," said Victor, his voice tense, "I didn't know you were in the area." "The best visits are always unexpected, don't you agree, Emily?" replied Mark, his eyes meeting hers with that same disturbing intensity. Emily felt her heart race. There was something in the way he pronounced her name, as if he held a secret that only the two of them shared. The general noticed the exchange of glances and immediately positioned himself between them. "Emily, dear, why don't you go check if the kitchen has properly prepared the cakes for our guests?" suggested Victor, in a tone that made it clear it wasn't a suggestion. As she walked away, Emily managed to catch fragments of the conversation between the two men. Words like agreement, betrayal, and consequences floated to her ears, further increasing her curiosity about the true nature of their relationship. That night, during dinner, Emily decided to risk asking a few questions. "Your cousin seems to have very interesting opinions about politics," she commented casually. The general set down his cutlery with excessive force. "Mark is not a subject for a lady to discuss," he responded dryly. "Focus on your duties as a wife." But Emily couldn't simply ignore the mysteries that were accumulating. During her walks through the castle gardens, she began to notice strange movements. Carriages arrived during the early hours. Meetings happened behind closed doors, and documents were burned in the general's office fireplace. One afternoon, while looking for a book in the castle library, Emily found a secret compartment behind one of the bookshelves. Inside, there were old letters and a diary with Mark's handwriting. Her heart raced as she read the first pages. "True power lies not in weapons or money, but in the secrets we keep," said one of the passages. Victor chose his path, but he forgot that every choice has its price. The sound of footsteps in the corridor made her quickly put away the documents. Seconds later, Mrs. Grayson appeared, her suspicious gaze scanning the library. "The general is looking for you, madam," announced the housekeeper. "He wishes to discuss the preparations for next week's ball." The ball. Emily had almost forgotten about the grand event that the general had been planning for weeks. It would be the first time she would be formally presented to high society as his wife. During the preparations, Emily couldn't get out of her head the words she had found in the diary. What secrets was Victor keeping? What was Mark's true role in this whole story? Her reflections were interrupted by an even more intriguing discovery. While supervising the arrangement of the guest rooms for the ball, she found an old portrait hidden in one of the wardrobes. The painting showed a young woman strikingly similar to her, wearing a wedding dress. On the back, a faded inscription simply said, "Forgive me, Victor, M." The mystery deepened, and Emily began to suspect that her marriage was just the tip of a much larger iceberg. The castle walls seemed to hold secrets that could completely change her understanding of the general, of Mark, and of her own role in this intricate web of relationships. At night, alone in her chambers, for the general insisted on separate rooms, Emily watched the moon through the window. Thunder was in the stable, and she longed for the freedom of another night ride. But now, as the general's wife, her surveillance was even stricter. A mysterious note was slipped under her door. "Not everything is as it seems. The ball will reveal long-hidden truths." Emily kept the note close to her heart, feeling that she was about to discover much more than just political secrets. The ball was approaching, and with it, the promise of revelations that could change her destiny forever. The preparations for the ball transformed the castle into an anthill of frenzied activity. Velvet curtains were exchanged, silver candlesticks polished until they mirrored, and the main hall decorated with elaborate arrangements of fresh flowers. Emily observed everything with a mixture of fascination and apprehension, aware that each detail had a purpose beyond mere ostentation. "This ball will be a landmark in our society," declared the general during breakfast. "Many important people will be present, including the governor and his wife. I expect you to behave up to the occasion." Emily nodded silently, but her mind was focused on Mark's mysterious note. What were these truths he mentioned? And why choose the ball as the moment to reveal them? On the afternoon before the event, while supervising the organization of the tables, Emily met an elderly maid arranging flowers in one of the corners of the hall. The woman, who introduced herself as Rose, had been working in the castle for more than 3 decades. "You remind me so much of her," Rose murmured almost to herself while adjusting an arrangement of white roses. "Her who?" asked Emily. Her interest immediately piqued. Rose seemed to realize she had said too much and tried to evade, but Emily gently insisted. After checking that they were alone, the maid whispered, "The general's first bride." The shock of the revelation made Emily stagger slightly. "First bride, but—" "The general was never married before." "Officially, no," Rose responded, lowering her voice even more. "It was a long time ago, before he became general. She disappeared on the eve of the wedding. Some say she ran away, others—" The maid abruptly stopped as she heard footsteps approaching. Mrs. Grayson appeared in the hall, her severe gaze fixing on the two. "Rose, the guest rooms need to be prepared. Lady Emily, the dressmaker awaits for the final fitting of your dress." During the dress fitting, Emily could hardly concentrate on the dressmaker's instructions. Her thoughts were fixed on Rose's revelation and the portrait she had found days before. Was the young woman in the painting the mysterious first bride? The dress chosen by the general was a work of art in midnight blue silk and silver lace, to match the Aldridge family colors, he had explained. But now every detail of the outfit seemed laden with hidden meanings. That night, unable to sleep, Emily decided to risk a visit to the library. She needed to find more information about the general's past. On the way, she heard raised voices coming from the office. "You're playing with fire, Mark." The general's voice sounded threatening. "Don't dare interfere again." "It's always been your problem, Victor," Mark replied with studied calm, "thinking you can control everything and everyone. But some truths can't be buried forever." "I've buried deeper secrets than this," Victor retorted. "Don't test me." Emily held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. The sound of approaching footsteps made her quickly retreat to her room, but the words she had heard echoed in her mind. On the morning of the ball, the castle bustled with the final preparations. Musicians tuned their instruments, chefs gave final touches to elaborate dishes, and servants ran from side to side with crystal glasses and silverware. Emily spent the morning receiving meticulous instructions from Mrs. Grayson on how she should behave. "The first ball as the general's wife is crucial," the housekeeper emphasized. "Every gesture, every word will be observed and judged." While preparing for the event, Emily found another note on her dressing table. "Wear the sapphire necklace tonight. It holds more than just jewels, M." The mentioned necklace was an ancient piece from the Aldridge family, which the general had insisted she wear to the ball. Examining it more closely, Emily discovered a small hidden mechanism in the clasp. Inside was a folded paper, but before she could read it, Mrs. Grayson entered to help her with the dress. As night approached, Emily felt the weight of imminent revelations. The sapphire necklace on her neck seemed to pulse with unrevealed secrets, and each tick of the clock brought her closer to the moment when the truths promised by Mark would come to light. The first guests began to arrive, their carriages forming an impressive line at the castle entrance. Emily watched from her bedroom window, aware that this would not just be a night of dance and celebration, but possibly the moment when her entire world would change forever. The ballroom shimmered like a golden dream. Hundreds of candles reflected in the Venetian mirrors, creating an almost magical atmosphere. The guests, dressed in their finest clothes, formed a kaleidoscope of colors and textures that swirled to the sound of the orchestra. Emily remained by the general's side, greeting guests with a practiced smile. The sapphire necklace weighed on her neck, constantly reminding her of the secret it held. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for Mark among those present. "Darling," the general's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Governor Augustus and his wife have just arrived. Come greet them." The governor was a robust man with graying hair and astute eyes that seemed to evaluate everything around him. His wife, Lady Beatrice, an elegant woman in her 50s, studied Emily with particular interest. "So this is your young wife, Victor," commented Lady Beatrice, her gaze lingering on the sapphire necklace. "What an interesting choice of jewelry." Something in the way she said it made Emily shiver. The general lightly squeezed her arm, a silent warning to maintain composure. "The necklace has belonged to the Aldridge family for generations," explained Victor, his voice controlled. "I considered it appropriate for Emily to wear it tonight." "Yes, I remember it," replied Lady Beatrice, her eyes never leaving the necklace. "The last time I saw it was about 20 years ago, under very different circumstances." A tense silence settled, broken only when the governor suggested they move to the main table for dinner. Emily noticed that the general's hands trembled slightly as he pulled out her chair. During dinner, political and social conversations flowed around her, but Emily was more interested in the meaningful exchanges of glances between Lady Beatrice and other older guests. Clearly, there was an untold story circulating in that hall. It was then that Mark finally appeared, causing a discreet buzz among those present. Elegantly dressed in black, he moved through the hall with feline grace, occasionally stopping to exchange words with selected guests. "Victor," called the governor, his deep voice cutting through the parallel conversations, "your cousin seems to be causing some agitation among some of our older friends." The general straightened in his chair, his expression hardening. "Mark has always had a gift for causing unnecessary agitation," he responded dryly. "Necessity is a matter of perspective, don't you think?" intervened Lady Beatrice, her eyes shining with ancient wisdom. "Sometimes agitation is precisely what we need to clear long stagnant waters." Emily observed the exchange of words like watching a fencing duel, each phrase loaded with hidden meanings. The paper hidden in the necklace seemed to burn against her skin, begging to be read. After dinner, when the music resumed, Mark approached to invite Emily to dance. The general couldn't object without causing a scene, but his gaze promised consequences. "The necklace suits you well," Mark murmured as they danced, "though I wonder if you know its true history." "Why don't you tell me?" Emily challenged, keeping her voice low. "Some stories are better understood when discovered on one's own," he replied, gracefully spinning her. "But I suggest you pay special attention to Lady Beatrice. She knows more chapters of this story than she lets on." The dance ended, but Mark's words continued to echo in Emily's mind. Taking advantage of a moment of distraction from the general, she managed to approach Lady Beatrice, who was alone on one of the balconies. "It's remarkable how some stories tend to repeat themselves," commented the older lady, without turning around. "Same necklace, same hall, same family, just different faces." "Lady Beatrice," Emily began, carefully choosing her words, "you seem to know many stories about this castle." "I once knew someone very much like you," she replied, finally turning. "A young woman full of life promised to a powerful man. She also wore that necklace. On the last night she was seen." Emily's heart raced. "The general's first bride." Lady Beatrice smiled sadly. "Isabella was her name. She also had her own dreams, her own will, and she also discovered secrets that some would prefer to keep buried." Before they could continue the conversation, Mrs. Grayson appeared, announcing that the general was looking for his wife. Emily had to say goodbye, but Lady Beatrice's words had planted another piece in the puzzle she was trying to assemble. The night advanced, and with it grew the feeling that something important was about to happen. The paper hidden in the necklace seemed to weigh more and more, and the glances exchanged between the older guests carried messages that Emily was beginning to understand. While the ball continued in full swing, Emily found a moment to discreetly retreat to one of the side corridors. With trembling fingers, she finally managed to open the secret compartment of the necklace. The folded paper revealed delicate and ancient handwriting. "My dear Mark, if you find this message, it means my suspicions were correct. The documents proving Victor's involvement are hidden behind the portrait of his grandmother in the office. I can no longer continue with this charade. Tonight during the ball I intend to..." The rest of the message was smudged and illegible, but the signature was clear. "Isabella." A noise of footsteps made Emily quickly hide the note. Lady Beatrice appeared in the corridor, her purple silk dress rustling softly against the marble. "I see you finally discovered the message," she said, her voice laden with knowledge. "Isabella wrote it on the night she disappeared. She too had discovered something she shouldn't have." "What did she discover?" asked Emily, her voice barely above a whisper. "Victor has always been an ambitious man," Lady Beatrice replied, approaching. His rise to the position of general was not conventional. Isabella found compromising documents, evidence of questionable negotiations and secret alliances. The distant sound of music reached them, a melancholic waltz that seemed to underscore the gravity of the conversation. Mark was different back then, Lady Beatrice continued. More idealistic, more passionate. He and Isabella had grown up together, and their love was a secret known to few. But Victor had other plans. Emily felt her heart tighten. The arranged marriage, it was Victor's way of securing his political position. Isabella was the daughter of an important diplomat. Their marriage would open doors, consolidate alliances. A movement in the shadows caught Emily's attention. Mark was standing near one of the windows, his silhouette cut against the moonlight. "You have the right to know the whole truth," he said, joining them. Isabella didn't simply disappear. She discovered that Victor was involved in a scheme of political manipulation that could destroy several important families. "Including mine," added Lady Beatrice. "My husband, the governor, was one of the few who opposed Victor's methods." Isabella found documents that proved a conspiracy to remove him from power. Emily felt the weight of each revelation, as if they were stones on her shoulders. Her own experiences with the general began to make sense. The obsessive control, the secret meetings, the burned documents. "Why are you telling me all this now?" she asked. "Because history is repeating itself," Mark replied, his eyes fixed on hers. "Victor hasn't changed his methods. Your marriage, Emily, wasn't just a common political alliance. Your father—" A scream coming from the hall interrupted the conversation. The three ran back to the ball where they found a chaotic scene. The general was in the center of the hall, his face red with fury, while holding some papers in his trembling hands. "Who dared to enter my office?" he thundered, his eyes scanning the guests until they fixed on Emily and her group. The portrait of the grandmother, Emily realized with a start. Someone had found the documents that Isabella had mentioned in her message. Lady Beatrice stepped forward, her regal and defiant posture. "Some truths cannot remain buried forever, Victor." The hall plunged into a tense silence, broken only by the distant sound of the tower clock striking the hours. Emily realized she was at the center of a much larger plot than she had imagined, a story that had begun 20 years ago and was now reaching its climax. The general advanced towards her, his eyes fixed on the sapphire necklace. "You," he whispered, his voice trembling with contained anger. "You are exactly like her." The ballroom, once filled with music and laughter, was now plunged into a tense silence. All eyes alternated between General Victor, who trembled with fury in the center of the hall, and Emily, who remained beside Mark and Lady Beatrice, her face pale but determined. 20 years, said the general, his voice laden with bitterness. 20 years building all this, and you think you can destroy it with some old papers? Governor Augustus stepped forward, his expression grave. "Victor, what documents are those? What's happening?" Emily realized it was time to act. With a courage she didn't know she possessed, she stepped forward, facing her husband's furious gaze. "The truth, Governor," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "The truth about how the general rose to power, about secret alliances, and about Isabella's disappearance." A murmur ran through the hall. Many of the older guests exchanged meaningful glances, as if a long-kept secret was finally coming to light. "Don't you dare!" growled the general, advancing towards Emily. Mark quickly placed himself between them, his posture protective. "Enough, Victor," said Mark, his voice laden with contained emotion. "You've caused enough damage. Isabella deserves justice, and these people deserve to know the truth." Lady Beatrice approached the governor, handing him some of the documents. "Augustus, read. You'll see that our suspicions all these years were correct." The governor examined the papers, his face visibly aging with each line read. "My God, Victor. Bribery, blackmail, political manipulation. This goes far beyond what we imagined." Emily, feeling it was the moment to reveal everything, took the note from the sapphire necklace. "And there's more," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "A message from Isabella, written on the night she disappeared." The general visibly paled at the sight of the note. "Where? How did you—" "The necklace," Emily replied, touching the sapphires on her neck. "The same one Isabella wore that night. She left a message, knowing she was in danger." Mark spoke up, his voice laden with long contained emotion. "Isabella discovered Victor's plans. She knew he planned to use the marriage to consolidate his power. eliminating any opposition, including the governor. And when she threatened to expose everything, Lady Beatrice began, leaving the sentence hanging in the air, laden with dark implications. The hall exploded into a chaos of raised voices. Some guests demanded explanations, others defended the general, arguing that it was all a conspiracy. The governor raised his hand, calling for silence. "This is extremely serious. Victor, do you have anything to say in your defense?" The general seemed to have aged decades in a few minutes. His gaze wandered around the hall, pausing for a moment on Emily, then on Mark. "You don't understand," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "What I did was for the greater good. The country was on the brink of chaos. Someone had to take drastic measures." "At the cost of innocent lives?" Mark questioned, his voice trembling with contained anger. "At the cost of Isabella?" A heavy silence fell over the hall. Emily felt the weight of 2 decades of secrets and lies hovering over everyone. "Isabella," the general began, but his voice failed. "She shouldn't have interfered. I had no choice." Those words seemed to break a dam. Lady Beatrice let out a muffled sob, while Mark furiously advanced towards the general, being restrained only by the quick intervention of some guests. The governor, recovering from the initial shock, turned to his assistants. "Call the authorities. General Victor Aldridge is in custody until we can fully investigate these accusations." As guards approached to escort the general, Emily felt a confused mixture of emotions. Relief at finally knowing the truth, horror at the revelations, and a deep sadness for Isabella's fate and all those affected by this plot. "Emily," called the general, his voice now devoid of all previous authority. "I really believed I was doing the right thing. You need to understand." She looked at the man who until recently was her husband, seeing for the first time not the powerful general, but a man broken by his own ambitions. "Understand, perhaps," she responded softly. "Forgive. That will take time." As the general was led away, the ballroom, once the scene of elegance and power, now seemed like an abandoned stage after the end of a tragedy. Emily felt the weight of the sapphire necklace, no longer as an adornment, but as a symbol of a story that was finally reaching its conclusion. Mark approached, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. "It's over," he said softly, "but there's still much to be done." Emily nodded, aware that this night was just the beginning of a new journey. A journey of healing, of justice, and perhaps of a new beginning. The first rays of sunlight found Emily sitting in the castle library, exhausted but unable to sleep. The hours following the ball had been a whirlwind of testimonies, interrogations, and heated discussions. The castle, once a symbol of power and opulence, now seemed like a besieged fortress, with government officials coming and going, searching every corner for more evidence. Lady Beatrice entered silently, carrying 2 cups of steaming tea. "I thought you might need this," she said, offering one of the cups to Emily. "Thank you," Emily murmured, accepting the tea gratefully. "It's strange. I spent months wishing for freedom, and now that I have it, I don't know what to do with it." Lady Beatrice smiled understandingly. "Freedom can be frightening when we're accustomed to cages, even if they're golden." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the occasional clinking of teacups. Emily looked out the window, observing the garden where not long ago she had dreamed of a different life. "What will happen now?" she finally asked. "The legal process will follow its course," Lady Beatrice replied. "Victor will face a trial, and many others will be implicated in his web of conspiracies. As for you, my dear, your marriage will be annulled. You're free to follow your own path." The word free echoed in Emily's mind. Free, but for what? To where? As if reading her thoughts, Lady Beatrice continued, "I know it may seem scary now, but you have a strength within you that you can't even imagine. Isabella would have been proud to see how you faced all of this." The mention of Isabella brought a new wave of emotions. "I wish I could have known her," Emily said softly. "In a way, you did know her," Lady Beatrice responded. "Through your choices, your courage. You completed what she started." A soft knock on the door interrupted the conversation. Mark entered, looking as tired as they were, but with a determined gleam in his eyes. "The investigators have finished searching Victor's office," he announced. "They found a diary. It seems he recorded everything over the years." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. "Everything?" Mark nodded gravely. "Including What happened to Isabella? The silence that followed was heavy, laden with 2 decades of unanswered questions. "She deserves a proper funeral," said Lady Beatrice, her voice choked. "A place where we can honor her memory and all that she represented." Emily stood up, walking to the window. Outside, the world continued turning, oblivious to the revelations of the previous night. Servants tended to the garden, birds sang, and in the distance she could see the fields where she had once dreamed of riding freely. "I would like to help," she said, turning to Mark and Lady Beatrice, "with the funeral, with whatever is necessary to do justice, not just for Isabella, but for all who were affected by this conspiracy." Mark approached, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "Are you sure?" You've already been through so much." "Precisely because of that," Emily replied, feeling a new determination grow within her. "I spent months being a piece in a game I didn't understand. Now, I want to be an active part in rebuilding what was broken." Lady Beatrice smiled, a mixture of pride and sadness in her eyes. Isabella would say the same. "You two, so alike and so different at the same time." The 3 remained silent for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. The future was uncertain, full of challenges and potential dangers. The general's fall would certainly have ramifications that went far beyond the castle walls. "What do we do first?" Emily asked, breaking the silence. Mark exchanged a glance with Lady Beatrice before answering. "There's a property in the countryside not far from here. It was Isabella's favorite place. I thought we could start there, maybe give her the rest she deserves." Emily nodded, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and hope. "When do we leave?" "As soon as you're ready," Mark replied softly. At that moment, looking at Mark and Lady Beatrice, Emily felt she was on the threshold of a new chapter in her life. A chapter she would write herself, free from the manipulations and expectations of others. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firm and decided. As the sun rose on the horizon, bathing the library in golden light, Emily felt that for the first time since she had arrived at the castle, she could breathe freely. The future was uncertain, but it was hers to shape. The carriage swayed gently on the dirt road, taking Emily, Mark and Lady Beatrice away from the castle and its grim revelations. The surrounding landscape gradually changed, cultivated fields giving way to wild prairies and small groves. The air became fresher and purer as they moved away from the city. Emily watched through the window, her thoughts a whirlwind of emotions and unanswered questions. Beside her, Lady Beatrice absent-mindedly leafed through a small book of poetry, while Mark, seated across from her, alternated between consulting a map and casting contemplative glances at the horizon. "What was she like?" Emily suddenly asked, breaking the silence that had enveloped them for hours. "Isabella, I mean." Lady Beatrice closed the book, a nostalgic smile forming on her lips. "She was light. There's no other word to describe it. Isabella had a contagious energy, a free spirit that inspired everyone around her." Mark added, his voice soft. "She loved nature. She spent hours riding, exploring every corner of this region. That's how she discovered the property we're going to." "The Willow House," said Lady Beatrice. "A small refuge hidden between hills and a winding stream. Isabella found it during one of her rides and instantly fell in love with the place." Emily tried to imagine Isabella, young and full of life, galloping freely through the fields, discovering hidden secrets and beauties in the landscape. It was an image that resonated deeply with her own longings. "She and Mark planned to run away there," Lady Beatrice continued, casting a compassionate look at the man across from her. "On the night of the ball, 20 years ago," Mark completed, his voice laden with emotion. "We had everything planned. I would wait for her at the Willow House, and from there we would leave for a new life, far from Victor's manipulations and society's pressures. But she never arrived," Emily concluded softly, understanding the depth of the tragedy that enveloped them. A heavy silence fell over the carriage, each lost in their own thoughts and memories. Emily felt a deep connection with Isabella, as if somehow she was completing a journey that the other had begun 2 decades ago. As they advanced, the landscape became wilder and more picturesque. Small hills covered with wildflowers rose on both sides of the road, and the sound of a stream could be heard in the distance. "We're arriving," announced Mark, his gaze fixed on a point beyond the next curve. The carriage rounded a particularly steep hill, and suddenly, as if it had emerged from a dream, the Willow House appeared before them. It was a modest but charming construction, with stone walls covered in ivy and a slate roof. Majestic willows leaned over a small lake, their leaves dancing gently in the afternoon breeze. Emily felt her heart race at the sight of the property. There was something magical about that place, a sense of peace and possibilities that she had never experienced before. When the carriage stopped, the three descended in silence, absorbing the beauty and tranquility of the location. The sound of the nearby stream and the birdsong were the only noises that broke the silence. "It's exactly as I remember," Mark murmured, his voice choked with emotion. Lady Beatrice placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "She loved this place, Mark, and now finally we can honor her memory here." Emily walked slowly towards the house, feeling the soft grass under her feet. As she approached the entrance door, she noticed something curious. A small carving on the doorframe, almost erased by time. It was two intertwined initials, I and M. "Isabella and Mark," she whispered, tracing the letters with her fingers. Mark approached, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "We did that the last time we were here together." A promise of a future that never came to exist. Emily felt a wave of empathy and sadness. "We can create a new future," she said softly, "one that honors Isabella's memory and all that she represented." Lady Beatrice joined them, her gaze surveying the property. "This place has always been a symbol of hope and freedom. Perhaps it can be again, not just for us but for all who were affected by Victor's actions." The three remained silent for a moment, each contemplating the possibilities that opened before them. The Willow House, a place that for so long had held memories of a lost love, now seemed to offer the promise of a new beginning. "Where do we start?" Emily asked, feeling a new determination grow within her. Mark smiled, the first genuine smile Emily had seen on his face since the revelations at the ball. "We start by cleaning, restoring, bringing life back to this place. And then we'll see what stories it has to tell us." As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold, Emily, Mark, and Lady Beatrice entered the Willow House. The air inside was stale, heavy with the weight of 2 decades of absence, but also with the promise of new beginnings. Emily knew that the following days would be full of hard work, exciting discoveries, and probably more revelations about the past. But for the first time since she had left her home to marry the general, she felt truly on the right path. A path she had chosen herself, guided not only by her own heart, but also by the legacy of a woman she had never met, but whose courage now inspired her every step. The days that followed at the Willow House were a mixture of hard work and exciting discoveries. Emily, Mark, and Lady Beatrice dedicated themselves to the task of bringing life back to the place, cleaning, repairing, and organizing each room. Amidst the dust and covered furniture, Emily found herself fascinated by every small detail that revealed a bit more about Isabella and her story. One day, while cleaning an old desk in what appeared to have been an office, she discovered a secret compartment. "Mark, Lady Beatrice," she called, her voice trembling with excitement. "I think I found something." The three gathered around the desk as Emily carefully opened the compartment. Inside they found a small leather-bound diary, several letters yellowed by time, and a sepia photograph of a young woman smiling next to a horse. "Isabella," Mark whispered, taking the photograph with trembling hands. "This is the last photo we took together before everything happened." Lady Beatrice picked up the diary, carefully leafing through it. "These are her thoughts, her plans, her dreams. My God, this is priceless." Emily observed the two, feeling both an intruder and an essential part of that moment. Picking up one of the letters, she began to read aloud. "My dear M, each day that passes, I feel more suffocated by the expectations and obligations that surround me. But when I think of our plans, of our house hidden among the willows, I find strength to continue. I know that what we are about to do will change our lives forever, but I can no longer live a lie. The truth we discovered about V is too heavy to carry alone. We need to act not just for us, but for all who will be affected if he manages to realize his plans. See you soon, my love. Soon we will be free. Eternally yours, I." A heavy silence fell over the trio after the reading. Isabella's words, written 2 decades ago, echoed with an urgency and emotion that transcended time. She knew, Mark finally said, his voice choked. She knew how dangerous it was, but she was determined to do the right thing. Lady Beatrice nodded, leafing through more pages of the diary. Isabella was always brave, but I see now that she carried a much greater weight than we imagined. Emily felt a deep connection with Isabella at that moment. She now understood, more than ever, what the young woman had faced, the difficult choices she had had to make. "We need to continue her work," Emily said, determination in her voice. "Not just expose the truth about the past, but ensure that something like this never happens again." Mark looked at her, a mixture of admiration and gratitude in his eyes. "You're right. Isabella left us more than memories. She left us a mission." In the days that followed, the three immersed themselves in Isabella's writings, gradually unraveling the extent of the conspiracy she had discovered. The diary revealed a complex network of corruption and political manipulation that went far beyond General Victor. As they worked to restore the house, Emily, Mark, and Lady Beatrice also worked to reconstruct the truth. Each new discovery brought them closer, creating a bond forged by a common purpose. One night, sitting on the newly restored porch, watching the sunset reflect on the small lake, Emily found herself reflecting on the changes in her life. "It's strange," she said, breaking the contemplative silence. "A few weeks ago, I felt completely lost, trapped in a life I didn't choose. Now you're at the center of something bigger than all of us," Lady Beatrice gently completed. Mark, who had been absorbed in his thoughts, turned to Emily. "You brought us hope, you know. When you arrived at the castle, so similar to Isabella, it was as if the past had returned to give us a second chance." Emily felt her heart race at Mark's words. Over the days, she had grown closer to him in a way she hadn't expected. Their shared pain, their common purpose, had created a deep and unexpected connection between them. "What will we do when we finish here?" she asked, looking at the horizon. Lady Beatrice smiled, a determined gleam in her eyes. "We'll continue Isabella's work. There's much to be done to correct the mistakes of the past and build a better future. Together," Mark added, his gaze meeting Emily's. At that moment, watching the sun set over the willow house, Emily felt she was exactly where she should be. The future was still uncertain, full of challenges and potential dangers, but for the first time in her life, she felt truly free to face it on her own terms. The gentle evening breeze carried the scent of wildflowers, and in the sky, the first stars began to appear. Emily closed her eyes, feeling the comforting presence of Mark and Lady Beatrice beside her. Isabella's legacy lived on through them now, a flame of truth and justice that would not easily be extinguished. The weeks at the Willow House passed quickly, filled with discoveries, planning, and a growing sense of purpose. Emily, Mark, and Lady Beatrice had transformed the property into a base of operations, working tirelessly to organize the information found in Isabella's diaries and letters. One morning, while reviewing some documents in the restored living room, Mark rushed in, holding a newspaper. "You need to see this," he said, extending the periodical. The headline screamed in bold letters, "Political Scandal Rocks Capital, General Victor Aldridge implicated in decades-long conspiracy." Emily felt her heart race as she read the news. The article detailed how anonymous documents had been sent to various newspapers and authorities, exposing a network of corruption that extended through various levels of government. "Was it you?" she asked, looking at Mark. He nodded gravely. "I used some trusted contacts to ensure that the truth was disseminated widely and irrefutably." Lady Beatrice took the newspaper, her eyes quickly scanning the columns. "This will cause a political earthquake. Many powerful people will fall, and many others will finally have justice," Emily added, thinking of all the lives affected by the general's machinations and those of his allies. The three exchanged glances, aware that they had crossed a point of no return. The truth that Isabella had died trying to reveal was finally coming to light, and the consequences would be enormous. "What do we do now?" Emily asked, feeling a mixture of apprehension and determination. Mark approached, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Now, we prepare. People will come seeking answers, and we have to be ready to provide them." In the weeks that followed, the Willow House became the epicenter of a silent revolution. Journalists, investigators, and even reformist politicians began making pilgrimages to the property, seeking more information and evidence. Emily discovered in herself a strength and eloquence she didn't know she possessed. Alongside Mark and Lady Beatrice, she told Isabella's story, explained the complexities of the conspiracy, and advocated for the need for deep reform in the political system. One afternoon, after a particularly intense interview session, Emily found herself alone with Mark in the back garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, reflecting on the calm waters of the lake. "You've been amazing," Mark said, his voice soft and full of admiration. "Isabella would be so proud to see what you've accomplished." Emily felt a blush rise to her face. "I'm just trying to do what's right." What she would have done. Mark moved closer, his eyes fixed on hers. "It's more than that, Emily. You've brought light back to this place, to our lives. You've given us hope again." Emily's heart raced at Mark's proximity. Over the weeks, her feelings for him had deepened, transforming into something she barely dared to name. "Mark, she began, but was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Lady Beatrice appeared on the porch, her face a mixture of excitement and concern. "We have visitors," she announced. "The new Prime Minister is here." The arrival of the Prime Minister marked a turning point. In a long meeting that went into the night, the three presented all the evidence they had gathered, detailing the extent of the conspiracy and its long-reaching effects. "This goes beyond a simple reform," said the Prime Minister, his expression grave. "We'll need to rebuild people's trust in their institutions from the ground up." Emily, feeling the weight of the moment, spoke with a conviction that surprised everyone, including herself. That's exactly what Isabella wanted, not just to expose corruption, but to create a fairer and more transparent system for everyone. The Prime Minister observed her with renewed interest. "You speak with the wisdom of someone far beyond your years, Miss Emily. Perhaps you could have a more active role in this reconstruction." The implications of that offer hung in the air, laden with possibilities and responsibilities. Emily exchanged glances with Mark and Lady Beatrice, feeling the silent support of both. When the meeting ended and the Prime Minister departed, promising immediate action, the three remained in the living room, absorbing everything that had happened. "It seems our work is just beginning," Lady Beatrice commented, a tired but satisfied smile on her face. Mark turned to Emily, his eyes shining with a mixture of pride and something deeper. "What do you think, Emily? Are you ready for this next adventure?" Emily looked out the window to the garden where the willows danced gently in the night breeze. She thought of Isabella, of all the lives affected by the conspiracy, and of her own path that had brought her here. "I'm ready," she replied, her voice firm and decided. "For Isabella, for all of us, and for the future we can build together." That night, under a starry sky, Emily, Mark, and Lady Beatrice stayed up late, planning the next steps of their journey. A journey that had begun with a reluctant bride and an arranged marriage, and now unfolded into a mission of national transformation. And as they talked and dreamed of a better future, Emily felt for the first time in her life that she was exactly where she should be, doing exactly what she should do. Isabella's legacy lived through her, and with Mark by her side and Lady Beatrice as a guide, she was ready to face any challenge the future might bring. The months following the Prime Minister's visit were a whirlwind of activities. The Willow House transformed into an unofficial centre for political reform, with Emily, Mark, and Lady Beatrice at the epicenter of a change that reverberated throughout the country. Emily discovered in herself a natural leader, capable of inspiring and mobilizing people from all sectors of society. Her words, laden with passion and authenticity, echoed Isabella's story and touched hearts in a way no one expected. One sunny morning, as Emily prepared for another series of meetings in the capital, Mark found her on the porch, contemplating the blooming garden. "You look pensive," he observed, joining her. Emily smiled softly. "I'm thinking about how everything has changed. A year ago I was a reluctant bride, trapped in a marriage I didn't want. Now you're the voice of a nation in transformation," Mark completed, his gaze full of admiration. Emily turned to him, feeling her heart accelerate as it always did in Mark's presence. "I couldn't have done it without you, without both of you," she said, thinking also of Lady Beatrice. Mark took her hands in his touch gentle but full of meaning. "Emily, you've brought light back into my life in a way I never imagined possible again. After losing Isabella, I thought I would never—" He hesitated, searching for the right words. Emily felt the tension in the air, laden with unspoken emotions and possibilities. "Mark, she began, but was interrupted by Lady Beatrice's arrival. "Sorry to interrupt," said the older lady, a knowing glint in her eyes. "But we have important news. General Victor's trial has been set for next month." The news fell upon them as a reminder of how much was still to be done. The process of exposing the truth and seeking justice was far from over. The weeks leading up to the trial were intense. Emily worked tirelessly, preparing to testify, reviewing evidence, and mobilizing public support for the proposed reforms. On the eve of the trial, Emily found Mark in Isabella's old office, now transformed into an operations center for their work. "Are you nervous?" he asked softly. Emily nodded. "A little. Not for what I have to do, but for what it represents. It's the end of one chapter and the beginning of another." Mark approached, placing his hands on her shoulders. "You're ready for this, Emily. More than that, you're exactly what this country needs right now." Their gazes met, and for a moment the world around them seemed to disappear. Emily felt as if she were on the brink of something immense, something that would change her life forever. "Mark, I need to tell you," she began, but was interrupted by the sound of someone knocking on the door. Lady Beatrice entered, carrying an old box. "I found this in the family archives," she said, placing the box on the table. "I think you should see it." Inside the box they found more letters from Isabella, including one addressed to the future. With trembling hands, Emily read it aloud. "To whoever finds this letter, if you're reading this, it means the truth has finally come to light. My greatest fear was that my sacrifice would be in vain, that the shadows would continue to spread. But I had to believe that one day someone would have the courage to continue this fight. Whoever you are, know that change is possible. Love is possible. Even in the darkest hours, there is hope. Don't let fear win. Don't let the past define the future. Build a better world, a world of truth and justice. With love and eternal hope, Isabella." An emotional silence fell over the trio. Isabella's words, written so many years ago, seemed like a blessing for the path they had chosen. The next morning, when Emily rose to testify at the trial, she carried with her not only the weight of the truth, but also Isabella's strength, Mark's support, and Lady Beatrice's wisdom. Her testimony was powerful and moving, revealing not only the crimes of the past, but also the vision of a fairer and more transparent future. When she finished, a reverent silence hung over the courtroom, broken only by the muffled sobs of some spectators. In the days that followed, as the trial proceeded and reforms began to take shape, Emily, Mark, and Lady Beatrice continued their tireless work. The Willow House became a symbol of renewal and hope, attracting people from all corners of the country who wanted to be part of the change. One night, as they celebrated another legislative victory, Emily found Mark alone in the garden. The full moon bathed everything in a silvery light, creating an almost magical atmosphere. "Emily," Mark said softly, "there's something I've been wanting to tell you for a long time." She turned to him, her heart racing. "Yes? I love you," he said simply. "Not just for what you've done for this country, for Isabella, for all of us, but for who you are. Your strength, your compassion, your courage, you've made me believe in love again." Emily felt tears of happiness forming in her eyes. "Oh, Mark," she whispered, "I love you too, more than I can express." Under the benevolent gaze of the willows and the stars, they kissed, sealing not only their love but also a promise of a future built on truth, justice, and hope. And so, as a new day dawned over the Willow House and over the entire country, Emily knew that her journey was far from over. There was much work to be done, many battles to be fought, but with Mark by her side, Lady Beatrice as a mentor, and Isabella's spirit guiding the way, she was ready to face any challenge. The future, once uncertain and frightening, now shone with infinite possibilities. And Emily, the young woman who had once been a reluctant bride, now found herself on the threshold of a new era, not just for herself, but for an entire nation. 5 years passed since that night in the garden of the Willow House. The country had changed drastically, transformed by the reforms that Emily, Mark, and Lady Beatrice had helped implement. Corruption, though not completely eradicated, had been significantly reduced, and a new era of transparency and citizen participation was flourishing. Emily, now a respected figure in national politics, walked through the corridors of Parliament with the confidence of someone who knew exactly her place in the world. Her tireless work for social justice and political reform had made her one of the country's most beloved and admired leaders. By her side, Mark, who had become a lawyer dedicated to human rights causes, held her hand with pride. Their marriage, held 2 years earlier at the Willow House, had been a celebration not only of their love but also of everything they had achieved together. Lady Beatrice, though older, continued to be a vital force in their lives, offering wisdom and guidance in both personal and political matters. She had become a sort of grandmother to Emily and Mark's twin daughters, Isabella and Beatrice, named in honor of the two women who had so greatly influenced their lives. That sunny afternoon, they gathered at the Willow House for a special occasion. The place, once a secret refuge, was now a memorial and educational center, dedicated to teaching new generations about the importance of truth, justice, and civic participation. Emily climbed the small podium set up in the garden, looking at the gathered crowd. Journalists, politicians, activists, and ordinary citizens all were there to witness the official inauguration of the Isabella Center for Memory and Citizenship. 6 years ago, Emily began, her voice clear and emotional. I was a lost young woman, forced into a marriage I didn't want. I had no idea how much my life would change, or the impact that the actions of a woman I never knew would have on me and our entire country. She paused, her eyes finding Mark's in the front row. He smiled encouragingly, holding their 2 3-year-old girls in his lap. Isabella dreamed of a better world, Emily continued, a world of truth, justice, and equality. She gave her life for that dream, but her sacrifice was not in vain. Today we inaugurate this center, not only in her memory, but as an ongoing commitment to the ideals for which she fought. Lady Beatrice, seated next to Mark, discreetly wiped away a tear. Her role in Isabella's story and in the country's transformation was something she carried with pride and humility. This center, Emily continued, will be a place of learning, debate, and action. Here future generations will learn about our history, not just the moments of glory, but also the mistakes and struggles. They will learn about the power each citizen has to make a difference, to question injustice, and to build a better future. The crowd applauded enthusiastically. Among them, Emily recognized faces of people who had been fundamental in the struggle of recent years: courageous journalists, reformist politicians, tireless activists. But our journey doesn't end here, Emily said, her voice gaining strength.